Verse 14. Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. Okay, so, Numbers, 430. Oh man, 430. And so, there are those who say, God said 400 to Abram. Now they're 430. Contradiction. Bible wrong. Then there are those who say 400 years they lived as slaves in Egypt. Okay, because this is kind of, as it seems kind of being stated here. Well, I mean, it seems maybe, okay. Yeah, so there's lots of opinions concerning it. Now again, I want to say, if you look at the times, I'm one of those who hold more to the fact that they were not that long enslaved in Egypt. Slaves itself, maybe just over 80 years. If you look at Moses, they were already enslaved before that, but not long before that. And then the whole killing of the children started, and that was 80 years before, just over 80 years before, maybe 100 years. I mean, so, but how do we get to 430? And how doesn't it contradict 400 of Abram? Firstly, God told Abram about the 400 years later. I mean, the 30 part could have started when Abram left Haran, and actually, remember the drought in the story, he went down to Egypt one time. And so these 30 years could have been then after God gave him the first time the covenant, or he left Haran and he went down to the promised land, to this land of sojourning. Now actually I think, I don't know if now it's in NIV or wherever, it states that this 430 years is the years of sojourning. It doesn't add in Egypt, but sojourning per se. And then that would make kind of sense, because the easiest explanation, 430 years in the desert before the birth, 25 years before Abram's birth, birth. And then at 5 years of old, after he was what's the word now for that? I am sorry, my English, sometimes I lose words. When he was now not drinking his mother's milk anymore, and he was now like not a baby seen as anymore, but now a boy kind of idea. Seeing some people say this happened at the age of 5, around is about. And that is when Ishmael, the son of an Egyptian, laughed at him. So Ishmael, the son of an Egyptian, laughed 30 years later after Abram went into the promised land, started his sojournings, and very soon after that, they actually ended up in Egypt, where I was kicked out. And then the 400 years that was said from that moment onwards, that God said, and the 400 then starts there, so it's the 30 up to the 400 then. And then you have the time while there was still Isaac, then Jacob's children, Jacob being born, and only Jacob ultimately went to. And that's, well, maybe just under 200 years later that they actually only went up to, because of Isaac's life, and then a huge part of Jacob's life as well. And yes, then at the same time, Joseph was still ruling there in Egypt. And so there would have been that time when they had actually a very privileged position. And they were not going to forget about him immediately after that. It would take some time. And even then, the forgetting most likely, as explained in the whole earlier concerning verses from Exodus, other videos, that the forgetting most likely had as well to do with trying to erase their history from not forgetting. They knew they were there, but they tried to erase like we know how lots of people are erased from history depending on who is the power of the day, the winning power of the day. I mean, man, we know it. Or the kind of people they were. They erased some part of their life that maybe contradicted what they were supposed to be, or etc., etc. I mean, these things, they do happen. It happens to us all the time. It happens in history all the time. You're a fool if you don't think it happens, right? So yes, that most likely is that what the forgetting part had to do. Another Pharaoh wanted to, because he didn't want the Hebrews to think of their past. He wanted them to just to work as slaves, and so he could not keep. You guys came here on your own free will. We actually invited you, and you actually played a role in us surviving. If they would have done that, then they ought to have treated the Hebrews better. But by erasing that part of their history, ultimately they could treat him as badly as they did and enslave them. So I think that is most likely again the reason. But so this enslavement was not 400 years, not 430 years, but it's actually maybe just 100 years. Okay, maybe even less than that. Right, so this is then, yeah, I would go for this idea of the time of sojourning, or then add the number of years that since Abram went to Egypt, and add Abram to the equation of his first going to Egypt. So the other thing about verse 41 just is the fact that this 430 years to the very day that the divisions left Egypt. So it's not like on exactly the 430th day, because I mean that's not how they counted. And again explained, like so many cultures, they like will say this is, they don't work. They're not all Japanese who work. Trains goes on the second, and 30 seconds later, I wrote a whole a book about saying sorry about the train 30 seconds later, something like that. Like it recently happened. They're not Swiss. So on the very day, that doesn't mean like exactly that specific 140 years date in the second and the millisecond later that this happened. In general, I mean, these guys didn't have watches and stuff like that, at least that we know of. So then, after 430 years, they left Egypt. Verse 42. Because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. So that night, God kept vigil. Well, how did God do it? No, the blood actually was a sign that I'm going to go around and not. So God is the one who did all of this. God's the one that protected them. And so therefore now they, on that night as well, that is why they go late at night. They need to keep vigil as part of the meeting, because this is how God kept vigil. God protected them from his own wrath. And just on that is how we are, through the blood of Christ, protected from the wrath of God as well. In Christ, you are safe. Outside of Christ, you're not safe. Inside Christ, God keeps vigil. Outside of Christ, God doesn't. Okay, so you need to be like the wise virgins keeping vigil and not let your oil run out kind of idea. But yes, sure, that's future teachings. We're not at that stage yet. So this is the night, that night when they left, what God did, keeping vigil, and now part of the celebrations is they need to keep vigil as well. And through keeping the vigil, like God did for them, honoring God for generations to come. Not just for them there, but for generations, for actually all eternity. That's the idea behind it.